Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm delighted today to be joined by a fellow podcaster. Jeff Young is here with me. Folks may remember Jeff from his time with EdSurge, cranking out amazing education content. He's now out on his own with a podcast called Learning Curve. We're going to talk all about that, AI, you name it. Before we get to any of that, Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
How many episodes did you do? We were comparing notes before. You cranked it out.
Yeah, with EdSurge, it was over 300. It just hit 300 a little bit before that ended, but it was quite a run. And yeah, weekly, a lot of interviews.
Yeah. And EdSurge as an editorial brand, for many, many years, kind of even through like the MOOC era, right through the teens into the early 2020s. Something folks have really relied on. I've had Tony Wan on the show a bunch of times.
Tony. Yeah. Miss working with
guy.
Tony.
Yeah, he's a great guest too. Yeah. But enough about that. Let's hear a little bit more about you in your own words. What's your background? How'd you get to this point in your career?
Yeah, well, I have been a journalist for a long time now. I joke that basically I am seeing this latest AI trend craze through the lens of having started as a journalist when internet was new. And so I know that, my own kids don't really believe me, but that was a thing, that there weren't these tablets and internet everywhere. But as it totally was, and it was all new. And at the beginning, when, I started, I just happened to get a job out of college at the Chronicle of Higher Education, which was the luckiest thing, just because not only was, I was really interested in covering tech at the time. That was what I wanted. And I found this opening there, and it was at a time when colleges was where the incubation of tech was. I mean, that was the excitement around internet. If you wanted to go to get access to try what was it like to be really connected, it was, the only place with broadband was kind of a university.
A lot of us got our first email addresses that way. Yeah.
Same thing, first email address. So it was that was the place. It's kind of not necessarily the case right now with the AI.
Yeah, a little bit ironic.
Yeah, but it was that way. And so being at the Chronicle, I actually focused on technology a lot of my time there, and it allowed me to do some, just see things up close that were really fantastic. Talk to all these amazing players that turned out to be, leaders in innovation and
ed tech,
and certainly ed tech. And I mean, this is kind of, it sounds a little name droppy, but I got to interview Steve Jobs because back in the day, there was a moment where, when he first came back to Apple, and people don't even remember that phase of history probably, but he first had to kind of reestablish the Mac in education, especially higher ed. So at that point, he was up for an interview with the Chronicle, and
that's great.
And so,
I mean, you were at the Chronicle too, so that's a good place to start, because it's you could just, when you could just call it the Chronicle, it's legit.
So I did this interview with Bill Gates. So I was able to do a lot of,
not podcast, this pre-podcast. This was old school reporting.
They did videotape it, so you could watch it somewhere.
Okay.
But yeah, there was no podcast at the time.
Yeah. And then over the years, you stayed in the space, and then maybe a note or two on EdSurge and what it was and what that experience was like, and then we can jump into Learning Curve.
Yeah, no, and I ended up leaving the Chronicle because I really wanted to relocate to the Midwest, where my wife is from, and we're out here in St. Paul now. And doing that, I found EdSurge right at the right time when they were expanding their higher ed coverage, really starting their higher ed coverage. So I was able to really be able to guide that and shape that. It was super exciting. When I started there, it was a venture back, for profit, and with a lot of resources, a lot of energy, people like Tony Wan.
It was like a newsroom. Yeah.
It was a newsroom. We were really, really covering an important niche where people weren't covering edtech very much.
Yeah.
You could
I was a Kaplan. I was a loyal follower, nothing against the Chronicle, but I was more in the EdSurge demo through those years.
Yeah. So we were really, in it was based in the Bay Area. So I was, they were flying me back every quarter for meetings, and that let me really do a lot of in-person reporting in the Bay Area. Yeah. More so than I would have been able to. And they also let me do the podcast, which spend more time on the podcast than I was at the Chronicle. So really I kind of fell in love with this format. I'm sure you know how.
It's crazy, the parallels to, I was doing the same thing at Kaplan, where it wasn't my full-time job, but I was so drawn to it. and I really haven't been able to let it go. And then the great news is, podcasts are a pretty resilient format, although now obviously everything's topsy-turvy and YouTube's turning it into video, yada, yada, yada. But all that being said, you developed some skills, Liam Neeson, a particular set of skills that now that you've left EdSurge, you're applying them to your own activity. You have a new podcast that we wanted to talk more about because both your story is interesting, but then the topic area you're focusing on, and we want to get into that. I don't mind geeking out a little bit on the AI as it relates to education, but let's tell us that chapter. What's going on with you lately?
Yeah, no. So EdSurge folded its higher ed coverage earlier in the year. So I'm out on my own now as an independent journalist. I'm doing some freelance, and actually it's been great. I work a little bit with the Chronicle of Higher Ed as a freelancer these days. So
Yeah.
connecting with old colleagues. But for the podcast, I miss podcasting. I kind of felt like I needed it, but I really was thinking like the story right now is AI in education. I mean, it's even feels different than some of the previous tech that I've covered and over the years. And in that there's this, existential aspect to it that feels deeper than even previous ones. I mean, like, with MOOCs, there was this sense that, that some colleges might, I remember that Sebastian Theron said, there'll only be 50 college left in a couple decades.
Yeah.
And we want to be one of them. That was Udacity, his startup. But, there was no real threat. The idea was like, you would still be taking college classes, but they would be video, maybe by different providers. It wasn't the question of like, is college a good thing? It was basically like college will be online. And, college is increasingly has online options.
Sure.
But the overall structure of higher ed is not altered really. But the way AI feels like there's all kinds of questions, like how do you prove students know what they know?
Totally.
If there's this AI tutor, do you have to go to a college anymore?
Right.
Or do you have to go to any college? Like, is it going to radically shake up what people need for their credentialing?
What do the jobs look like on the other side?
And then the jobs, right. And then if colleges don't do anything, are the jobs changing so fast that that's actually not an option like it was in the MOOC era where, should colleges have shaken up teaching because of these online courses being out there? A lot of people that were telling me, yes, it didn't really happen though.
A handful of like disruptive players,
for sure. And we both have talked to them on our podcast.
Southern New Hampshire and Western governors, but it's a relatively small number. Really interesting space. Coursera, if you want to look at it more on the venture side. But like, there's a lot of interesting activity kind of nibbling around the edges, but like the core institutions of higher ed have felt pretty resilient up until maybe the last handful of years, where the combination of AI and the political context of like higher ed under siege, it is an interesting time to think about how AI may relate to the future of learning and also the future of education. And that's what Learning Curve is about.
That's right. So I decided if I started a podcast, it made sense for me to like try to get at this story and to zoom back. As anybody who's listened to my podcasts in recent years, like I'm very interested in these narratives of how we kind of think about technologies that are disruptive when they come to education. And so, that's been true for a while. Plenty of episodes on back when it was the EdSurge podcast. But I feel like with AI, it's even more important to sort of try to understand, to think about AI as a tutor. Is that the most productive way to think about it? Can it do that role ever? Or is that, if you think about what a tutor is, like I've volunteered as a tutor.
Yeah.
We've all had tutors at some point.
I'm a Kaplan guy. You're speaking my language. Yeah.
So like, what is that really? Like, what's really useful there? Is it about content? Sure. Is it about getting people unstuck? Sure. But it's also so human. It's so someone believing in you and someone being there and, getting you. And is it something that any tech, even if it can do it, if it can do some of those things I said of like content or getting you unstuck, is that tutoring? Or is it something valuable, but not tutoring? Would we be better off to try to, kind of label it in a way that kind of sets our minds as we think about these new tools so that we don't kind of accidentally overreach and do things in changing education that might push out tutors or might leave us without as much human tutoring
Yeah.
accidentally, inadvertently over time. Or
Right.
or maybe they are tutors. Maybe, that's the thing is like, I think a lot of these questions aren't there yet, especially, I mean, as you know, with AI, it's like, there's this kind of, oh, is there just going to be AGI,
Right.
generalized intelligence where it's going to reset a lot of things even beyond what I've talked about?
Right.
Or, can we get there? How soon will we get there? Those
Hmm.
questions are real and nobody really knows the answer to those.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it's like, well, it does do something. Even if we never get to AGI,
Right.
seems like there's pretty much a consensus that there's something new in this technology
Yeah.
that makes it kind of an internet level disruption that's
Yes.
gonna be part of our lives. So my hope with Learning Curve is to spark a conversation. Well, the conversation's happening, to be part of a conversation and help people as they're having the conversations they're having as parents, as educators, as professors, as university leaders, as high school leaders. Like when this tech is here, it feels urgent, but there's so many questions. How can we kind of guide that conversation through interviews and storytelling on this podcast and connecting people out there that are trying things?
And I will give you credit, from a curatorial perspective, I was picking up on some interesting links for you, just a few episodes out so far,
Yeah.
but you're curating interesting stuff. The work that Paul LeBlanc and George Siemens are doing with Space and Matter. Is that what's called?
Matter and Space.
Matter and Space. That looked really
That's what they're
interesting.
calling their company. Yeah.
I learned it by checking out your show notes. We'll include a link to Learning Curve in the show notes for this episode. What you're touching on is something I wind up talking about a lot on the show. Well, two things. One is we've been talking about things that are zeitgeisty since this show was founded, and it's almost beyond a zeitgeist. I sometimes suffer from AI fatigue because we talk about it so much, and I can't really have a conversation about education without talking about AI. That being said, it's not going anywhere, and you can't really hide from it.
Right.
But the other thing we talk about a lot is more like mental models, frameworks, being flexible, being able to flip from one paradigm to another. AI is forcing us to do that, and it's forcing us to do that about ourselves and like what is the human in this relationship. And a lot of the recent thinking, in fact, I think it was George Siemens on Paul Fain's podcast, The Cusp, where he was talking about we're entering an agentic era where like agents are going to be part of the equation. And then the other thing is more the cyborg, the blending of the AI with the human, the extended mind. I just saw recently the notion of cognitive assemblages where you can start to create these cognitive sort of bots, agents, things that are somehow connected to you because you created them. And then the sum in some ways becomes greater than the parts. It's a pretty heady time. How are you sort of staying grounded and organized about how you attack something as big as AI and education?
I'm continually, checking myself with reading amazing Substacks, listening to other podcasts, learning as we go. Is such a, it's definitely one of those beats for people who like to learn because it's changing so fast.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. You mentioned the agentic, that's definitely a thread, but we did the first episode of Learning Curve is about this idea of hybrid intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And really thinking through, I mean, it's similar to some other models that you even mentioned, but thinking about like, okay, when we have AI and LLMs, the way they operate, they're not just a model of the way humans operate, but that's not a bad thing. But how can the things that are powerful about these LLMs, how can we harness them and then add the things that make us human, like you said, and like to dig into like how do we express our human brain to the best and maybe extend it through using an AI bot. And so I think basically how to stay grounded is also just trying not to only look at only the tech world of AI,
Yeah.
which can be pretty hypey sometimes, even though I have an affection and know a lot
Sure.
of great people and love talking to those folks.
Yeah.
But I also love talking to some, professors who've long been skeptical of
Yeah.
the way Silicon Valley operates and how things get pushed into schools and colleges. Sometimes
Gary
people are
Marcus is
ready
great on that stuff.
for sure. Read his, yeah, for sure. Just trying to make sure that I'm making sure my own feed and input is like fed in a broad way, and then hopefully bringing that to the podcast. So
Yeah.
it doesn't feel hypey, but it also doesn't feel like into some sort of like unproductive, like, well, let's forget about it. Cause I think there's enough, there's definitely been plenty of trends in technology that haven't taken off. I did some coverage of the metaverse there for a minute.
Yeah.
That did not get the kind of take up by the consumer that
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg clearly wanted. And that one, I think that one didn't work. But I think there's enough with AI that I think we're going to have to talk about it for a while.
It seems like the internet, right? Except the internet was stealthier and slower. Where AI, it's like the boy who cried wolf. People are like, AI is going to happen. I'd heard it for 20, 30 years. It was really hot in the 60s, 70s. Then we went through this like AI winter where people were just kind of like, get out of here. What are you doing? AI is not going anywhere. Come on. So what? Yeah, okay, yeah. And then suddenly the LLMs, AI was passing the Turing test.
ChatGPT just
It was freaking us out, and we really haven't recovered yet because it kind of blew up the previous mental model that these human skills are unique to humans and will allow us to kind of be the predominant generator of things. And now suddenly these non-human, although built off of human exhaust, these non-human things are doing unprecedented stuff, and it's getting scary. This is where, the uncanny valley comes in. People already distrust a lot of these institutions. And now, big tech is kind of rolling out these AI models. It's easy, and I try not to do this. This guy, Roger Spitz, talks about the Black Mirror effect. Like, it's easy to go dystopian when you talk about sci-fi. You talk about the future, you're easily going to go to, Skynet and the baddies take over. What I was struck by, at least some of your early episodes, is that you seem to be exploring more the positive side as well, like the potential upside. Thoughts on that? Like, how do you kind of be appropriately critical, but also not sleep on the fact that people are looking for hope?
I hope that it does come through, that I'm interested in both people finding applications that feel like it's a win for human students and education, while at the same time, definitely airing people with deep concerns about the way AI is getting implemented and some of the, kind of potential downsides, even if it takes off in positives. So one thing that I think that goes back a minute from what you were saying is the speed of adoption is something that I think is getting us all a little bit to. The Tom Friedman column in the New York Times, he talked about it as the age of vapor, which I thought was an interesting way, because the way AI is seeping into tools that we already use and have adopted.
Yeah.
I don't think he used this exact framing, but in a way, like, previous, the internet and stuff there, and even earlier things like MOOCs, like the cloud computing and the way we all interact with our technology, it's kind of changed since the last big things. Maybe social media had a little bit of this.
Yeah.
But, new features just kind of come to us, whether we adopt them or not. It's it's like the way kids are using AI often, it's like, oh, kids are going to ChatGPT. Well, also they just see it as an option on Snapchat.
Right.
It's come to where they are.
Yeah.
And I think
permeating everything. Yeah.
I think for all of us, it's come to where we are.
Yeah.
And so whether it's, I know that learning management system Canvas now has all these AI tools that just dropped.
Right. In fact, it's being pushed on us. Like the AI, the product marketers are like, look at these AI features. Look at how great the AI is. Many of the interviews that I do, with folks in the ed tech space about AI, it does feel a little infomercially. I try to keep them honest, but there is a little bit of, you're soaking in it. For those of us who remember the Palmolive ads, I love losing like 90% of my audience with my references. That's a pro tip.
Well, people can YouTube it. Sometimes I will do that with an old clip that I reference accidentally with my kids. I'll be like, let me show you on YouTube what I'm talking about. And then we'll watch the reference on some sitcom.
TV from the 70s. It's like the way I looked at people like cycling around on penny farthings in like daguerreotype, pictures and movies from like the late 19th century. But that's an entire aside. does make me think a little bit about storytelling. You mentioned that earlier, and I think it's partly our responsibility as folks who have platforms like this is to be critical and allow the story to be told, but then to also provide some framing, provide some language and some sort of structure so that people can help assimilate what's going on out there. Is there anything in that space, anything, you're talking to some pretty cutting edge folks who have really interesting ideas. Anything you want to put out there for our listeners who, ideas around AI or ways of thinking about it? Something surprising you've learned so far?
I feel like one of the surprising things digging into like where are the big wins right now, I've been really focused on higher ed
Yeah.
for some of these early episodes, especially. Also interested in high schools and doing a little bit there, but in higher ed, like show me where is the biggest surprising win
Yep.
where AI, now that so many colleges are starting to buy these or do these licenses deals
Yeah.
with the big providers, and there are definitely some,
Higher ed
and
needs an alpha school.
yeah, I guess I know what you mean, and I might do an episode on that, so stay tuned. But I think it's a little surprising that there aren't more use cases that are just killer apps, if you will.
Mhm.
To use an old reference, it's like
Yeah.
with the internet, it was like email. It was like obvious,
Right.
like you wanted to communicate with people. The web, it was just like obvious. There were some obvious wins what it's doing,
Mhm.
and one of the things with AI has clearly been like writing a paper for somebody, either helping them write a paper if used responsibly and making it better, or helping,
Right.
all brainstorm and revise, or just doing it for a student
Right.
who is in a mode of doing that. And so that's one of the use cases that is a clear, killer app of AI. But
Right.
there are definitely also, I think advising in the college setting feels like one that people are, saying that, okay, the advisor meets with the student maybe an hour at the beginning of a semester, like not a lot of human time.
Yeah.
And a lot of that time, unless it's gotten a lot better since back in my day, I hear it hasn't from people I interview. There's the time spent like looking like, oh, I want to take this class. Does that fit? Oh, I don't know. Let me go ask, or
Right.
let me sit here and make you wait while I look up that. And so if there's a lot of bureaucracy that AI seems
Yeah.
really good at, like helping to like turn into a quick chatbot version.
Mhm.
And if the accuracy gets good enough, then that can really increase the human time where, advising is clearly one where if college students don't get the right advice, you can really derail your time at a campus or
Yeah.
extend
Mhm.
it unnecessarily, or maybe even not have it work out. So I think things like that feel like they're an intersection of like why it matters, not just
Yeah.
efficiency because you might save a buck as an institution. But I'm actually searching and would challenge, if people want to send me at jeff@learningcurve.fm, like the ideas of like, okay, what are the big wins? Not necessarily from a product driven standpoint, but using a product at an educational
Right.
institution
Mhm.
beyond the classroom. Like we have a lot of good examples of classroom uses, which we will definitely be exploring on the podcast. But I
Yeah.
feel like outside of that, there's a lot of, use, and I'm feeling like where are the other big applications? I'm interested in like why we're not seeing them sooner.
Mhm.
I think you can't prove a negative. Like I'm not saying there aren't there,
Right.
but I think now we've gotten past the point where, oh, it's going to be a change. People are going to
Right.
should try it. They are trying it.
Yeah.
So maybe you found some on your podcast.
The model that's most intriguing to me, and I'm sure you've heard of, what Dana Stevenson and the folks at Ripen are doing. Ripen connects higher ed with companies to create projects that are aligned to the curriculum and the lesson plan on the academic side, but then hook seamlessly up into the needs of the workplace so that there's a benefit to everyone. Plus, it helps address some of the experience gap challenges that young folks are facing when they try to enter the workforce, where AI is eating up a lot of those sort of internship jobs. That's kind of an interesting space, but what I think is missing is the consumer learning app that actually augments the college experience to the point that somebody is kind of flying through it. It's removing this friction for the end user. But I feel like so much of higher ed is sort of baked into these rigid, like ossified
Hmm.
tech stacks that I think it's almost like a TikTok for learning, like some kind of something would be interesting. And I imagine that would be we'd have to worry about the screen addiction side and some of the human to human is the other thing. Like the AI should get better at providing more access, more time for us to have high value human interactions. But I still think, though, connecting higher ed more to the rapidly changing challenges of work in the 2020s, the second half of the 2020s, especially when higher ed itself is facing these existential crises. It's almost like their own innovation labs where they're using their own students to kind of solve their own problems at the university. I feel like there's some kind of misalignment within higher ed around leveraging tools to solve problems and kind of riding this. Instead, it's more like we're committed for a long period of time to this mode. So our ability to move is much slower. It'll be an interesting space.
Yeah, and as far as you asked about where some interesting things that I like, I appreciate you sharing that one. I was really struck by there's something at Babson College that is, of course, I think they're
Yes.
they're uniquely suited, right? Because they're
Yep.
entrepreneurial, it's a very business focused
Yeah.
institution. And so they're all over, having students and professors who are early adopters of
Yes.
AI for the
Mhm.
most part. But they've created this center, I think it's called the Generator, where if I understand it correctly, and I'm looking into doing something on this, so stay tuned, but
Yep.
I think it's co-led by students, a lot of student involvement
Yeah.
in the center and how they're imagining kind of using students in their thinking on AI adoption for the campus. That seems really smart because it's, the students are very motivated because they do want to get a job, as we all do, but like
Right.
entry level jobs seem particularly hard hit by AI in the early
Yeah.
days here. And so, if this truism that, it's AI won't take your job, you take somebody who doesn't know AI's job, like I'm just
Right.
like, okay, well, if you need to learn AI to sort of be up with what's going on, then getting students involved makes sense, as well as getting practitioners and projects in the workplace, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
so that there's some, like the players, it's not something higher ed can probably do all by itself, like a
Mhm.
professor in the old fashioned model.
Yeah.
So how do you link in employers that are up on this and students who I also see in surveys are spending more time with AI
Yeah.
than their older peers. And so than the adults in the room
Right.
in this case. And so how do you kind of coordinate that?
Yeah. I just listened to a podcast where Mark Cuban was interviewed and they were asking him, what would you be doing today if you were 17, 18 years old? And he said he would just go deep on AI and realize for the majority of smaller companies in this country, and there's thousands of smallish companies out there. And for each of them, especially if you have a little bit of domain knowledge, these tools are so new and so rapidly evolving that your services, if you lean in with like an entrepreneurial mindset, and I think, you mentioned Babson. Interestingly, I just interviewed a Babson dropout who founded an AI company. It's an interesting time, I think, if you are young, to potentially jump into a different paradigm. And that's where, like, if you opt out of higher ed, traditional higher ed, what do? There are those disruptive players in the higher ed space, but then there's also going to be other pathways to that first good job. And, where is AI adopted most effectively? And then to your point around advising, so you kind of land on the right path. Which problems are you leveraging it for? Where does it work? You certainly have plenty to cover on your beat. Hopefully our listeners will check out Learning Curve
Learningcurve.fm, or you can
and
find it on Spotify.
learningcurve.fm. Closing thoughts, sign off from a podcaster to our listeners.
Oh, well, I mean, I just am very excited to be back doing this. And I've been it's been heartwarming just to sort of get listeners to find me quickly after being away from it for a few months. And I just really am excited that there is this conversation going on and so many podcasts that are great out there. And it does feel like a time where it's more than ever the need to trade information and to share stories of what's going on out there to help people kind of sort through
You heard it here first. Jeff Young saying it's a golden age for education podcast.
That's it.
Jeff, thanks so much for joining me on today's episode.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And for listeners, if you like what you heard, subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.